with us. So Jazakallah khair everyone for joining us tonight for our final webinar in the series History of African Converts in the UK. I'm going to start off with a few ayats of the Qur'an from Surah Mu'minun. I'll be going over the first 10 ayats and then we will start the webinar inshallah bi'idhnillah. So أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Certainly will the believers have succeeded, they who are during their prayer humbly intent, and they who turn away from ill speech, and they who are observant of zikr, and they who guard their private parts except from their wives or those their rights hand possessors, for indeed they will not be blamed. But whoever seeks beyond that, then those are the transgressors, and they who are to their trusts and their promises attentive, and they who carefully maintain their prayers, those are the inheritors. So, subhanallah, bihamdik, may Allah make us of those of Jannah, inshallah, bidnillah. So once again, Jazakallah khair everyone for joining us. Welcome to the Muslim Council of Britain's African History series. Since 1997, the MCB has been working to unite and empower our diverse Muslim communities across the UK, guided by a vision of service and shared purpose. In this series, we begin with our final episode, which is the African history converts. So without further ado, I'll pass on to Sister Shema.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So we believe that to shape our future, we must first learn from the lessons of the past. And what better place than to start with the rich and vibrant history of Africa, its nations, its tribes, and its people. Here in Britain, more than 10% of Muslims are black, with roots stretching from the Caribbean islands of Trinidad and Tobago to the southern tip of Africa, from Madagascar in the Indian Ocean to the cities of Europe, and of course here in the UK. So why is the Muslim Council of Britain leading this series during Black History Month? Because this month is about standing firm in pride and power. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us in the Qur'an, O mankind, we created you from a male and a female and made you into peoples and tribes so that you may know one another. This is our story, our shared heritage. So join us, inshallah, as we learn from the past, reflect on the present, and envision a stronger, more united future together, inshallah. Because if we are to realize our vision 2050, we must begin by reconnecting with the roots of our history. So before we start, inshallah, a few housekeeping rules. Please type any questions that you may have for the Q&A section in the chat. We will try and group questions and apologies in advance that we may not be able to answer all your questions with the limited time that we have. And second thing is that this event is recorded and it will be on our MCB YouTube channel. So please do share it with your family and friends as well when it's online. Over to you, Hamda. You're on mute. You're muted, Hamda. Um, Hamda, can you hear us? Okay. Okay. Um, I will continue then until Hamda fixes her technical issues, inshallah. Um, So, inshallah, we have organized our webinar series for Black History Month in partnership with Zamzam Foundation UK. And it feels really great to have them as our sponsor, alhamdulillah. Why do I say that? Because what we are trying to do is honor African Islamic history and celebrate the culture and resilience and resourcefulness of the African Muslims of today. And what better sponsor could you ask for than one of Africa's leading indigenous Muslim charities? So inshallah, I want to introduce two organizations here, but before that, Hamda, are you with us? Yes. Would you like to carry on?
Apologies, everyone. I don't know what happened. My Zoom just gave up on me, so I'm had technical issues as always. Brilliant. So, Jazakallah khair, Shema, for introducing our wonderful partners. So, we have Zamzam Foundation, which is based in Mogadishu with 8 offices around the country. It provides emergency aid to those affected by conflict, drought, and floods, helping the poorest families to face the challenges of climate change and lift themselves out of poverty. It works in Somaliland, my home country, and Puntland in the north, in Jubaland in the hard-to-reach parts of the far south, and in pretty much all areas in between. It was established in 1992, set up by Somalis for Somalis to help the most vulnerable during unprecedented humanitarian crisis following the collapse of the central government and severe famine that followed. It's 33 years later, it has established itself as the country's biggest charity, supporting a record 2.6 million Somalis last year alone. And without further ado, we have a little video for you that showcases the work of Zamzam Health Centres, which varies in terms of its existence, and it's currently under threat because of international aid cuts.
Shukri is pregnant, expecting her second child. She already has 2 healthy children, born safely at Kalimo Health Center, with support from professional midwife. But Kalimo is one of the 2 health centers that will have to close within weeks unless we can find funds to keep them open.
maasha allah waa noola gargaaray daawo ka qaadanaa ilmaha waa noola talaalaa waa ku umalnaa waa noola gargaaraa marka waxaan u baahanahay inaan maxaan ku sheegaa aan nagala xirin isbitaalka.
Our health center in Kalimo and Gololi are lifeline for 51,000 people in around 94 villages, treating malnutrition, vaccinating children, delivering babies safely. Donations before the end of 2025 will be matched pound for pound by Lady Fatemah Trust, up to a total of £25,000. Please donate today and help us save lives.
Amazing, Jazakallah khair for that. And you'll have more information about how to donate, inshallah, bidnillah. And I will hand it back to Shema to introduce our wonderful speaker today.
Okay, inshallah. So, Dr. Anthony Abdul Haqq Baker converted to Islam in 1990 and worked in the legal profession for 10 years. After working in the legal profession for 10 years, he transferred his focus to community leadership and educational management following his appointment in January 1994 as chairman of the Brixton Mosque. During his 15-year tenure as chairman, up until January 2009. So he was chairman until January 2009, and his community work involved the establishment of the Brixton Muslim community's first registered independent Muslim primary school, Iqra. His work in this field led him to embark upon a Master's of Business Administration degree in education in 1995 to examine the apparent variance in government policy between Muslim and other more mainstream religious dominations education. His final thesis, entitled The Significance of State Funding for Muslim Education in Britain, and it highlighted the results of his research around what was considered to be a very topical issue where research was established to be minimal. So without any more delay, I'll hand over to Dr. Abdul Haqq, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, my sister. Both sisters, Hamd and Shayma, for the introductions. What we're going to look at with this topic, this final episode in the series, the history of African converts in the UK. Before we dive into the subject, there's a lot to cover, but I wanted to address the title because there would be questions, and I did get questions online about what does this title encapsulate as it relates to converts. Now, when we're speaking of African converts, we have to include those identified as African Caribbean, which is a large swathe, as we will see very shortly. British black converts, as they identify themselves as well, and black other. When we're looking at African converts per se, you'll see that those who came from Africa were predominantly, the generations before my own, were predominantly Christian. Now, a number of their descendants and a minority of them may have converted to Islam, but the focus of today's webinar is going to be around African Caribbean converts, British black converts, because I feel, and I think if we look at evidence, it is sparse, it is very rare in this regard. We appear to know more about black converts to Christianity during the 18th century than we know about black Muslims in the 20th century. So, for example, many of you or a few of you may have heard of Alauda Equiano, born 1745, died 1797. Ottabo Koguano, born 1757 up to 1791, we have records, and Francis Barber, 1742 to 1801. They were all former freed slaves who converted to Christianity. But if I ask for names of British converts, black converts to Islam, this is a very sparse history, a scant history, as I've highlighted. So the objective of today's lecture is to identify and illustrate the contributions of black Muslim converts in Britain, providing a visibility to a section of the wider Muslim populace that continues to be overlooked. So, for example, coming back to the point on identification, in my PhD research from 2010, I looked at a cohort of converts because the focus of my research was around converts and their susceptibility or their resilience with regards to radicalization when we were looking at the whole atmosphere and climate around radicalization in the UK. And I found that over 46% of my interviewees identified as Black Caribbean, 16% of them Black African, and 10% as Black British, whereas you had Black other being 6.6% precisely. So that focus on Black Caribbean, African Caribbean, British converts to Islam, I think is pertinent in the lens that we will be focusing on today. So when we look at Black converts today, within that caveat that I've just highlighted, we see from a University of Cambridge report in 2013 that stated that converts from an African Caribbean heritage may form one, if not the largest group of converts to Islam. However, there's no evidence to support that there's been a mass conversion to Islam. And while it was and is the largest group, it still remains a minority within a minority of heritage Muslims. So I want to look then at Black Muslim converts of this ilk. Has there been a historical oversight? Conversion among Black communities in the UK came to prominence with the very visible, should I say, and prominent convert from across the Atlantic, none other than Malcolm X. Prior to the 1960s, not much appeared to be recorded or known about British Black converts to Islam. There is one, however, individual known as Sadullah Rifa, who's arguably the first Caribbean convert to Islam on record, and he was of Trinidadian descent. Now, when he came with the Windrush generation, he was heavily influenced by Rastafarianism, which was the predominant socio-cultural, socio-religious faith of African Caribbean Black people in the UK at the time. He converted around 1958 to Islam after arriving in the UK, being in the UK for 2 years. Another more prominent name, which has some controversy around it, was Michael de Freitas, also known as Michael Abdul Malik X. He converted to Islam after meeting Malcolm X in 1965. He was a cultural heritage, his mother hailing from Barbados, and his dad being a white St. Kitts-born individual of Portuguese extraction. Now, he courted a lot of controversies, with some asserting he was not Muslim because of the very wayward lifestyle that he led, and others would put that he was adhering in his own understanding to Malcolm X, but his lifestyle was antithetical to Malcolm X's legacy. So when we look at the spotlight, going back 70, 80 years ago when we start seeing an emerging presence and pattern of conversion to Islam as it relates to Black African Caribbean converts, to Black British converts. That was under the shadow of what we were seeing across the Atlantic again with personalities like Muhammad Ali converting to Islam. We've already spoken about Malcolm X. Also, the Nation of Islam were very prominent as the largest Black purported Islamic organization. They were we know from the Nation of Islam ideology that when they were not considered part of mainstream Islam, but because of that presence and the controversy that they courted, that's where Islam, as it was associated with Black people, started becoming recognizable. But Muhammad Ali embraced Orthodox Islam. We know the story, we know his trajectory, and he remains one of the most famous Western African American Black converts to Islam that we have seen in the 20th, 21st century. Now, when we look at an account by Sheikh Danjuma Bajari, he states here the first wave of Caribbean Muslims in the UK were attracted to Islam because of its potential to furnish them with an alternative to the identity that had been imposed on them through 300 years of chattel slavery. This is a reality. This is a reality that impacts the later generations of Muslims with regards to slavery, with regards to institutionalized racism. But as I'd mentioned, Rastafarianism was predominant among Black socio-religious and cultural thought during the late 1960s, early 1970s. And I want to give an account of an individual that I know, sticking with the narrative of Sheikh Danjuma, where he highlights that many of those who were to utter the Shahada in the 1970s were former Rastafarians. The most evocative example was of two Jamaican brothers, one today who's known as Sheikh Abu Bakr and his brother Umar, along with their cousin Suleiman. They traveled to the west coast of Africa seeking out Haile Selassie I. They were Rastas. They wanted to go and meet him. They wanted to verify his claims. But as they got to Gambia and when walking inland, they heard the adhan echo all around them from the various masajid, the various mosques that were there. When they went into the direction of one of those adhans, they became enthralled and in awe, seeing the Mandinka Muslims who were worshipping. And that's what opened their hearts to Islam on the African continent. Now, when they returned to the UK, Sheikh Abu Bakr's brother, Umar, opened his living room in Belfru's Road in Brixton as a place of worship. And so a number of converts started gathering in that particular premises, which remains to this day still a house, but with small areas where a small Friday prayer is conducted. The rest of the growing community moved into what we now know as Brixton Mosque and Islamic Cultural Centre. And I will come back to that a bit later on when we speak about some of the legacies that have been left in that regard. Looking at the religious beliefs pre-conversion, I've already highlighted Rastafarianism being one of the influencing faiths at that time, which was rooted in Christianity to a degree as well. But then we see from Richard Reddy's work, Christian author on Black Muslims in Britain, that he highlights that his anecdotal evidence suggested that many Black people who converted or reverted to Islam previously had some association with the churches, with Christianity. But for a number of reasons, many of them stopped attending church during their teens or their early 20s. Referring back to my PhD research again, that's a reality that's there because I saw 60% of those who converted to Islam were formerly Christian, 3.3% were Rastafarians, and surprisingly, 23% were either atheist or had no particular belief at that time. So we see that whilst there was that rootedness among some of them in Christian-led or influenced ideologies, a significant amount of them had no belief whatsoever. What is noticeable amongst the converts that we're speaking of? And again, I'm speaking, if we look over the last 70, 80 years, you'll see that pattern remains. When Malcolm X in America converted to Islam, what age was he? Very young. When we look at the overall conversions across the board, Muhammad Ali, if you want to look at another personality, their ages, we find that a lot of them were very young. So again, looking at research, my research I'm referring to, and there are others like Kate Zabiri and others like that, Ali Khos, we see that 23% were between 12 and 15 years old. But the largest proportion of them were between 16 and 20 years old, 60% in fact. Over 30 or 26 to 30-year-olds only accounted to 3.3%. So the larger number of conversions, again, we're looking at Sheikh Abu Bakr, who had gone across to Ethiopia and then the Gambia, all around their younger ages. And this speaks a lot to the galvanizing factor that Islam continues to have for those who become aware of its guidance. Let's look at the reasons for conversion now. And again, remember, we're speaking about Black African, African Caribbean, Black British converts to Islam, a phenomena that is not even a century old. We can speak to the 100, 200 years, 2 centuries where we have accounts from White Britain, Marmaduke Pickthall, Abdullah Quilliam, Yusuf Ali. We have many accounts there. We have the Woking Mosque being the first purpose-built mosque. We have the Mosque of Quilliam in Liverpool. But when we start looking for converts, Black converts in this same context, we don't see or witness or reference any emergence until, as I've said at the outset of this particular webinar, 70 to 80 years ago, late 50s, 60s. But the reasons for their conversion now, this is quite significant. 50% convert because of Islam as a brotherhood, as a way of life. Many cite this as a reason. 30%, and especially those heralding from the Christian faith, speak about Islamic monotheism, Tawheed, as a defining factor. 10% would speak about it being a simplistic way of life. It made sense. There was logic to it. There were no contradictions. Whereas the remaining 10% referred to traumatic experiences which precipitated soul searching that led them or guided them to the faith. Looking at British convert communities and their historical significance, I've already alluded to the fact that the first great era of conversion to Islam in Britain left a remarkable literary legacy and foundation for Muslims, later Muslims, who would convert. But this era was underscored by white converts, as I've highlighted already. I've given some big personalities and names that are renowned in the annals of Islamic history in Britain. But it is the second era that is of more significance as it relates to the influence and impact of Black British Muslims. So, quoting here from Yahya Burt, who highlighted the second great era of conversion to Islam in Britain came in the 1960s and 70s, prefigured in the crossover between jazz and Islam. The two great conduits in this era were the Black Power movement, exemplified by Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali, and the return of Islam as part of Afrocentrism. So again, going back to that era, this is considered the second wave, where we see that swell, that slow but sure groundswell of Black British Muslims, those who'd come over from the Windrush generation, their descendants, looking at Islam as that alternative lifestyle and faith to the prevalent Christian faith that they had been raised in or had been imbued in as they were growing. And I want to speak now, as we've set this as a sort of foundation platform, about some of the achievements and legacies. Because following this, I'm going to speak about some of the challenges that face Black convert Muslims, that faced them as they were growing within British society and within a micro context, if you like, within the wider Muslim populace, and the challenges that they faced and continue to face today. So we see that those converts of the 60s, of the 70s, of the 80s, I dare say, they were pioneering in their embrace of the new faith. They were fearless in their pursuit of racial equality and equity and justice based on what attracted them to Islam in the first place. They were also committed to ensuring that succeeding generations would not have to endure the challenges that they faced and the myriad other factors that facilitated them becoming more visible on the Muslim mosaic, that landscape of Muslims, British Muslims in and across the UK. One of the things that we saw of the pigeonholing with regards to what are considered achievements for Black convert Muslims is unfortunately that pigeonholing of them as entertainers, sportsmen, or athletes in that particular regard. And that's something that's still prevalent today. Our forebears fought this and tried to make a visibility showing, just like our African Muslim counterparts. When I say African Muslim counterparts, we're talking about traditional heritage Muslims who herald from the Ghana, who herald from Nigeria and elsewhere, and they have a tradition of Islam. There are no conversions in that particular respect. But they are more respected and visible for academic pursuits, for professional pursuits. Whereas from the African Caribbean perspective, it was more within the entertainment industry, as I've just highlighted. So let's look at some of those achievements from the African Caribbean converts, Black British converts in this regard. One of the main ones, Brixton Mosque and Islamic Cultural Centre, was established at the beginning of 1990. I alluded to that when I mentioned Sheikh Abdul Bakr coming back and his brother setting up a prayer area in his Belfour Road home before moving to the larger Gresham Road premises. This became and remains the first Black-owned, Black-led convert mosque in the history of British Islam. That is a significant milestone amongst the Black convert community. Alongside that, Ashahada Housing Association was the first Muslim one established in South London, if not the UK. Asha, as it was first established, the abbreviation, was established in 1987 as a cooperative in South London. The founding members, all part of the Brixton Mosque community, elders again, noticed the lack of housing options for single young Muslims in the Lambeth area. So they started refurbishing short life housing. They expanded beyond then and have grown to exponential amounts today. And I'll mention a third success story amongst the Black convert community, predominantly African Caribbean, and that was none other than Iqra Independent Primary School, first established in September 1994. Two of the four sisters who pioneered the opening of this school, which is now an Ofsted outstanding school, were Black converts. And it was the first Muslim-run primary school in Lambeth, with a now renowned motto, training for this life and the hereafter. And if we look at the composition of students in that school again, re-emphasizing the presence and significance of Black African Caribbean converts, Black British converts within the diaspora. 15% were of African origin, 18% were of Arab origin, 16% were of Asian origin, and 45% were of African Caribbean origin, and their parents were converts to Islam. So I'm hoping that the viewers, I hope the audience are getting an insight into a community of converts, into a cohort of converts that is seldom recognized today on the British Muslim landscape. And this will move me into the penultimate stage of this discourse, where we look at challenges faced by Black Muslim converts. And one of them is a prevalent one, which shouldn't come as a surprise to any of us, and that's anti-Black racism. And I will quote from academic research in this regard again, and I like to do that to show that this is empirical data. This is not hearsay. This is not just speaking from subjective experience. So we see here racism perpetuated against Black Muslims by South Asian Muslims is drawn more from colorism and leftover sentiments of the caste system, as well as India's colonized past. One of the effects of this anti-blackness relates to beauty and self-worth. The hatred stemming from anti-blackness based on color reinforces the message that the lighter the skin, the more beautiful the person. This has negative consequences on individuals within the black community. And citing an individual, Aisha, a pseudonym, noted an experience of one of her friends who, quote, used those dish scourer pads, the metal ones, on her arms and her face to get herself lighter. And I'm quoting from research there. This anti-black racism is something that I would say, bringing in a personal anecdote now, shocked many converts because coming from the wider society of institutionalized racism, the polarization we see today and the racist sentiment we see today, and coming into the faith and then experiencing anti-black racism from co-religionists of South Asian or Arab traditional backgrounds was shocking to say the least. And that's what also led these founding converts in the British society, Sheikh Abdul Bakr and others I will name shortly, to look for, to seek out a place of worship where they wouldn't experience that racism, where they wouldn't experience that otherness and that questioning and doubting of their faith, because they would go to particular masajid, these traditional masajid, and they would not be, the salam would not be given to them. They would be asked if they were actually Muslim, and even be told in some instances that it was impossible for black people to be Muslim. These were some of the challenges they faced, which led them. This is why I say they were fearless. This is why I say they were committed. They were bold to establish a mosque where not only they, but their children could come and feel an integral part and really embrace Surah Hujurat, ayat 13, with regards to being that no difference and the best among the worshippers, the Muslims being those who ascribed to taqwa, piety. This moves me on to the other aspect of challenges faced, and it follows on from the anti-black racism, and that's invisibility. And quoting from Habib Akandi in one of his articles that he's written, to be black and Muslim in the UK is to be part of two marginalized and misunderstood communities. There are misconceptions and issues within both communities and towards each other. There is Islamophobia in black communities and anti-blackness in Muslim communities. Both are as a result of the idea that each community is monolithic. So many converts and our forefathers would have witnessed this, and those who've embraced the faith as black British Muslims today still face this, have a double whammy effect, where there's marginalization that was experienced in wider society, non-Muslim society, on a macro level. Again, I bring back institutionalized racism, systemic racism, and then in embracing a minority community faith, experiencing anti-black racism in that respect as well. And if I were to ask a question, and I'd ask you to consider, if you could identify 5, and if not 2, and if not 3, black personalities of repute and renown from black convert Muslims in the UK today, please type it in the chat box, or please raise it in whichever forum that you're in. And if you cannot, that will speak to the invisibility, the marginalization of black convert Muslims. Now, when I say black Muslims, I mean black convert Muslims, because we can hail black African doctors, pharmacists, businessmen, businesses. But I'm speaking about black convert British Muslims. Also, the general perception in the UK is that Muslims are either South Asian or Arab, but not black. And many converts had that, like myself, had that perception before embracing Islam, until understanding, no, Islam is a universal religion. But the consideration here is one is either black or Muslim, but never both. And the only area that you can look to, or could look to previously, to see where that dichotomy didn't exist would be to look at positive representation of black Muslim figures in the US. Muhammad Ali, again, as I've highlighted, Malcolm X. And the final challenge I want to mention before concluding this webinar with some references is the sense of belonging. The challenge yesterday, today, and tomorrow for Black convert Muslims of African Caribbean descent, British Black descent, who may not come from that wider traditional lineage of Muslims, is a sense of belonging. Now, some converts may have had or carved out a sense of belonging in wider non-Muslim society with Black culture, urban music, the street culture, which many heralded from. And that was so impactful and influential, that we see white culture is influenced by it. Somali culture now is influenced by the street culture. Asian culture is now influenced. And that was pre-Islam. And that was where many converts sat comfortably. Coming into Islam and shedding those particular characteristics or cultures, but yet seeing Muslims, traditional Muslims, pursuing them, is not only confusing, but it's disingenuous. But the sense of belonging to the wider Muslim Ummah is often predicated by adopting Arabism, Asian culture, or a culture, not religion, culture that is alien to what they were familiar with prior to embracing Islam. This has led a number of converts to seek hijrah abroad to the Middle East. Many have gone and become imbued and become immersed in the Arabism, which conversely heightens their sense of identity as British citizens, or they relocate to other parts of the world for socio-cultural, socio-religious reasons, and even economic reasons, like a number of our elders who migrated to the Gambia, Senegal, and other places. Some go into Africa because they wanted to feel that sameness, that sense of belonging with others of maybe not exactly the same culture, but definitely similar or same phenotypes. So these are some of the challenges that converts faced then and continue to face today, especially of African Caribbean heritage, Black British heritage. And in conclusion, what I would like to do, because again, I highlighted names at the outset of this discourse of Black former slaves who converted to Christianity. They are there. Wikipedia, Annals of History, the history books. We can go through those same references and we can find converts, British, English converts, historic figures of repute. But where are the names of those whose shoulders many of us stand on now? And I will name some of them who are still alive and some of those who have passed. So Sheikh Mohammed Kamaluddin is a community elder, proprietor of the Brixton Mosque, and trustee, part of the Committee of Elders. He embraced Islam in 1974 and is 88 years old. Sheikh Abu Bakr, who you've heard me refer to, who traveled to Ethiopia and then Gambia, embraced Islam. He embraced in 1979. He is an elder of the Brixton Mosque and Committee of Elders. He is 74 years old. Sheikh Abdurrahman Latouche, a community elder who, while embracing Islam, later is one of the elders and the oldest amongst this group of elders. He embraced Islam in 1993, is aged 89 years old. He recently relocated from the Gambia after leaving the UK and is now residing in Makkah. Sheikh Murtaza, community elder, mosque caretaker, embraced Islam in 1983. He's aged 87 years old. Sheikh Suleiman Abdul Sabor Shillingford, my mentor, who gave me my name when I converted to Islam, originally from Dominica, community elder, teacher, proprietor of the Brixton Mosque. He embraced Islam on the 15th of January 1975. He'll be 75 years old on the 11th of November, inshallah, a couple of weeks' time. Then there's his colleague, Sheikh Yunus Abdullah, embraced Islam with Sheikh Suleiman. They were the only two to have converted to Islam in Dominica at the time in 1975. Then there's Sheikh Abdul Rahman, another elder who was a founder of Ashahada Housing Association, who died a few years ago. May Allah have mercy on him. And then Sheikh Musa, another community elder and caretaker who died in 2024, aged 78. I want to bring a sort of outlier and refer to one of the significant founders, another of my mentors and many of our mentors, in Sheikh Surat Abdul Malik, who was African American, but moved to the UK and was pivotal in a large number of young people like myself at the time, community elder, who came to Islam and taught us Islam. He passed away 1 year after his wife, Sister Aisha Abdul Malik, in the mid-90s, and she was one of those converts that I mentioned who was a co-founder of Iqra Independent School. I haven't mentioned other pioneering sisters because I've not obtained their consent to mention their names in this discourse, but I think it's important, and for legacy reasons, that these names that I've mentioned be names that be repeated, that become familiarized, because I feel a disservice has been done to the African Caribbean converts who have really pioneered in ways that have been invisible, but now should become increasingly visible, not just in Black History Month. And my concluding words would be that as African Caribbean converts, and we stick with the prefix of African, we always feel, will always feel, have always felt empathy and solidarity with Africa and what's happened to Africa, what's happened to Black populations around the world, the Sudan, the DRC. What we're seeing taking place as we know, we're seeing a genocide taking place in Sudan at the moment now. And we are more than acutely aware that anything African is always secondary or tertiary to other causes, like Palestine, Kashmir, the Rohingyas. And we're not saying that these should be placed aside, but these causes should be of equal worth and attention and commitment to these causes. And you will see a dissonance from some quarters of the Black community, African Caribbean particularly, when we see an imbalance, when we see a lack of focus on areas that have to do with Blackness. This may be a stark conclusion, but we are looking at the history of African converts, and African Caribbean, Black British are all intrinsic to this definition, this terminology that is actually there. Our history is so new at 70, 80 years that we are writing history as we speak now. This is history in the making. I will conclude. Thank you for listening. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Barakallahu feek, Dr. Abdul Haqq. A lot of what you said resonated, particularly on the racism within the Muslim community, or the anti-Black racism within the Muslim community. And also your final remarks about Sudan in particular, as someone who is from Sudan. So please do keep our brothers and sisters of Sudan in your prayers always, because what's happening at the moment is words can't describe what's actually happening. And you're absolutely right in terms of the balance. Other causes have get a lot more attention, but when it comes to Black lives, it's always the back of our minds. So barakallah feek for mentioning that. And also the names that you mentioned, I think, for all of us, these are names that we need to know. We need to know their stories. We need to know what they did for the Black community and for wider society. The achievements and the things that they did is something that we need to all be aware of and be proud of, not just in Black History Month. So Jazakallah khair for mentioning their names, and inshallah we can all go home and research and learn more about them, inshallah. So just because I'm wary of time, so we'll get straight to questions. If we can keep answers to about 3 minutes, just so we can uh, so just so we're able to ask as many questions as possible, inshallah. So we'll start off with Sister Batul. Batul is from Convert Muslim Foundation. She says, "Thank you for this very informative and impactful presentation. You spoke of the racism, the Black community generally, but most concerning was the racism that emanated from the Muslim community towards the Black Muslim community in London and around the UK. How did the relationship between Brixton Mosque community and the Norwich community address this? And what was the impact of this relationship on the Black Muslim community overall? Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Jazakallah khair for this question, Sister Batul, a very good question. And it's very interesting. The time didn't allow for me to speak about the relationship between Brixton and Norwich. And initially, the Norwich community with Sheikh Uthman and the cohort there, they were part of the Brixton community and intrinsic to the Brixton community. What happened, the split occurred when they manifested different ideology to which they were adhering to compared to what the whole Brixton Mosque community were upon. So they highlighted their Morabitan affiliation, which shocked the Brixton community on the whole. And then there was actually a split in that regard. Up until that time, before that was manifest, what we saw, as I said, was the establishment of the first housing association in that regard. A huge cohort of young Muslims came in. While the ideology wasn't very clear, we had teachers in there teaching orthodoxy. Sheikh Suleiman Abdul Sabor, my mentor and teacher in that regard, Sir Abdul Malik, and the others in that regard. So I think that seeing that visibility and that level of professionalism when the two communities were together and founding a school, founding a housing association, this was incredibly impactful and effective amongst the wider community. Brixton Mosque used to be part of what was seen as the Beit al-Mal, and the surrounding mosque would always do fundraising for Brixton Mosque. Now, I remember as I grew in the community, we don't want that. We don't want handouts. So we stopped being part of that and started doing for self. So my sister, that started off well. I know there was that split that took place, and the Norwich community continued to grow. And I know it's a lot more multiracial now, but that's the history of what happened between the two mosques. I think I'm going to say this now, and I'll say this in hindsight with maturity from myself. If we stay in the space of civic engagement, not theology, as Muslims and a minority in the UK, we can come together and build institutions for our communities. But if we stick with theological lines and say this is where we have to move forward, understandably, we'll never come together. And I'll stop there. I hope that's answered your question, Sister Batul.
Jazakallah khair, Doctor. We've got many questions, mashallah, from the audience, so I'll move on swiftly to the next one. I think from Brother Connor. He says he converted to Islam in Birmingham in 1998, and at the time he observed a notable degree of racism directed towards Black converts by sections of the predominantly South Asian heritage Muslim community. He noticed that many Black converts gravitated towards Salafi mosques, where they often reported feeling more welcomed and included than the traditional Asian-run mosques. His question, therefore, is to what extent does this dynamic continue to exist in the United Kingdom today in 2025?
Another very good question. I'll answer that in a much more brief way. I think the golden era, as a Salafi myself, the golden era where there was that excitement, that uniformity, that focus on the melting pot that was Islam amongst the Salafi communities is not where it was then. I think that was a necessary stage of development. There is still, but to a lesser degree, I would say, arguably, still anti-Black racism amongst pockets of the South Asian community, but I think the younger and subsequent generations are a lot more open and understanding of the diversity in Islam. Some of the things that I described are no longer there, especially amongst the younger generations. With the Salafi communities, I feel that a lot of them became ours, I'll say our became very, very insular. And I feel that there needs to be more development with regard to that civic engagement aspect, looking at the challenges that are facing all of us. So it's got a little better, but I feel that the Salafi communities that I hail from and belong to have become more insular, and that has stagnated growth in the way that you've described when you first came to Islam.
Barakallahu feek, Doctor. Our next question is, what do you think are the critical factors in the sustaining of Black Muslim convert identity over decades? How to ensure that Black Muslims remain close to Islam?
Very good question. We need to look at, as I highlighted, the visibility of Black Muslims. I think when we look at representation, and I've asked that question, I don't know if anyone's given a response. If anyone can name Black British convert personalities in places of prominence other than entertainment, then I will breathe a sigh of relief. And we've got to ask ourselves why that is not the case. I think when we look at all leading organizations in the Muslim sphere, we will not see Black leadership. I'm not calling for affirmative action. I think everyone should be getting things on merit, but we need to look and see why that is the case. Why have we not got Black leadership in these Muslim spaces? Why is it the usual suspects, white, black, or white or brown in that regard, when you have many qualified individuals from these communities, many talented individuals from these communities, and they should not simply be compartmentalized to education or sport. So I think once we overcome that and we start taking off that blinkered lens and realize there's a problem and challenge with an imbalance in how we are addressing each other and filling roles within the community, then we can address it effectively. One thing I will say to conclude on this question, also understand that the cohort that I've been discussing, we come from a background of inherited trauma. We understand genetically what's happened to those who've had other trauma decades ago, centuries ago. It's a proven fact that there's inherited trauma amongst African Caribbeans whose lineage harkens back to slavery. There's inherited poverty, just like there's inherited wealth. If that's acknowledged and systems are put in place to address, the African Caribbeans are not asking for a handout, or a leg up. But what needs to be done is to recognize that these are challenges. We're always told to work twice, 3, 4 times as hard to get half of what everybody else has. That is exhausting. There has to be an acknowledgement of that, and the playing field has to be leveled so everyone can be treated on equal merit. That's not happening within Muslim communities at the moment.
Jazakallah khair, Doctor, for that. I think there's another question that might be interesting and relevant to everyone. Someone's asked in the chat, are there any resources on the people you've mentioned for further education? It would be helpful if there were some materials you could maybe direct people to, even your own research that was done by yourself, Doctor.
Good question. Okay. I don't know, but there very few. What I would ask you to look for, because we're looking at a specific remit now, my PhD is out there, and my book, it was published in 2011 and then 2015, Extremists in Our Midst, Confronting Terror. And you'll see that I discuss identity there, constructs there. I discuss case studies, and some of the data that I've provided come from that PhD study in that regard. Habib Akende, prolific author, wrote Illuminating the Darkness, has done other publications in that particular regard. Some of his work in that instance is good. I think you've had our brother Briggs, who Beyond Below, his work is amazing. Some of the work that he's put out should be looked at. But as it relates to what I'm speaking about today, the research is scant. These individuals, what I would suggest, and I'd ask MCB and MAB, Sister Shayma and Sister Hamda to do, is to approach these individuals. We really need to get their legacy and everything before Allah takes them, looking at the ages that are there, have them on podcasts, hear the wonderful, exciting, amusing, sad stories that they will tell about their history of growing as converts in the UK. They are amazing stories. So they are still around. The majority of them that I highlighted at the end, approach them as a resource, as a legacy. We need to do that. And it will be the first, I think, in the history of British Islam.
Barakallah feek. We have time for one last question. So is there a bigger grassroots number of black reverts than white reverts in the UK? Apparently it's being related that white reverts have a larger grassroots Islamic origin than black reverts in the UK. What is the truth?
I could not answer that question. You saw I referred to a piece of research that says that the African Caribbeans are the largest cohort of the minorities, but there's nothing empirical or firm that says that. With regards to white converts, there is a significant number of white converts, but that's an answer that I could not confirm hand on heart. But I know we have Sister Batul here. We have giants like her. We have Sister Sophia Gilat Ray. I've just seen that's in the chat as well. And these are academics and leaders in this space who may have data at their fingertips that will be able to better answer this question than me.
Barakallah feek. Thank you so much, Doctor. And I kind of just want to, there was something that you mentioned about what drew Black people to Islam, and you spoke about community and brotherhood as being one of the main reasons, or the first reason that made people convert. And I just thought that was such a beautiful thing. And it's definitely something that is missing and we need more of, particularly in the times that we live today. I think, brotherhood, sisterhood, that community feel is so important given all the trials that we're seeing across the world. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always keep us firm upon the truth. And unite us as brothers and sisters always. Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery and learning. I really enjoyed it, alhamdulillah. There was so much for me to think about as well. So, barakallahu feek.
I'll just quickly add, I've just seen that someone's written something, and thank you, brother, for writing that. Also, someone's asking about sourcing. If you look at my website, abdulhaqbaker.com, and you'll see that I populate that with a whole lot of stuff. So please feel free to go there if you have the time.
Inshallah, inshallah. We pray you found today's conversation both useful and inspiring, a reminder of the lessons, of our past, a call to action in our present, and inshallah, a vision for a brighter future and one of brotherhood and community, a future where, all communities can flourish, where we are united, empowered, and serving together for the sake of Allah. So that is it from me. Inshallah, I'll hand over to Hamda for final remarks.
Jazakallah khair, Shema. And I would love to conclude and say that this work is only possible with your support and also the support of our amazing supporters, Zamzam Foundation. So please do donate to them. Hopefully, inshallah, you should be seeing a screen where you could donate soon enough. But please do engage with them and contribute. Once again, you can keep in contact and become a friend of the MCB because together we can make Vision 2050 a reality. So until next time, inshallah, بإذن الله. Assalamu alaikum. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Enjoy your evening, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you. Okay.